Okay, our final presenter this afternoon is Bernard from Minnesota DOT. I think everybody knows Bernard. He's going to tell us about a reliability analysis of MnDOT's concrete rehabilitation sections. Please welcome Bernard.
Thank you. I have, other than my responsibility of making this presentation, I have an added responsibility of getting us out of here in good time. So let's see how we work on those two. All right. I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. One thing I want to say is that there are many systems. What we are generally familiar with in engineering are systems that are deterministic. In other words, there's an A operating on B, either by multiplication or addition or by some integration or something, and we expect a direct result. So our minds still work a great deal on things that are deterministic. And I do say here that purposes, when you have an objective function, it's usually deterministic. I want something that will last X number of years, and you've placed a deterministic request. And at the same time, you have a matrix of solutions. For instance, as we are heading more towards the performance-based design rather than the prescriptive designs and practices too, and even program deliveries, things are becoming less deterministic. They are more stochastic in the sense that there are multiple possible solutions to the objective function. And then other than that, the various results you can get come back again to something that is not absolutely deterministic, neither is it stochastic, but it's probabilistic. And that's the area in which we operate when we talk about concrete rehab, especially because in analyzing the performance characteristics, the expected life, and other performance variables, there are tools that are more reliable than others. And the chosen tool that we are using right now in MnDOT, particularly in developing the Pavement Investment Manual, because this presentation and the story that is based on this is a microcosm of that large effort. The reliability analysis is a reliable method, and that's where you have a coalescence of these three contrarieties of the deterministic, the stochastic, and the probabilistic. Now, if we look at a reliability approach, you can hazard a function, or you can look at the hazard of a particular fix and see how, look at the hazard versus time, and then think of the reliability as a mirror image of that. We can look at it in that way. So you can give your reliability a function, and you can also give your hazard a function, but there is a hazard function, and there is a reliability function. And those are the kind of things that we are using, such that if you looked at our data and you analyze them in Australia, you should still get somewhere about the same result if you use the same method. So we are restricting the method in order to encompass the deterministic, the probabilistic, and the stochastic. Now, I will call him a philosopher, who actually helped in this area. He did help with material science, with Young's modulus for various materials and things. That's how he started. And when the military saw what he was doing, they said, no, this is good. Let's use this for things that are more infrastructure based. And that's where the migration left the original industry of manufacturing and all that, where they do 6 sigma. In infrastructure, we really don't need 6 sigma. 1 sigma is enough. 6 sigma is 6 standard deviations. Imagine that. So you are dealing with very fine, not in infrastructure. But the Weibull method is applicable in the sense that what it does for us is it doesn't assume a distribution. In some cases, you will say, oh, well, it's normally distributed, and you use a certain analysis. But the Weibull distribution does not make an assumption of the Weibull method doesn't make an assumption of your distribution. It actually solves the problem and ultimately tells you what distribution it belongs to. And later I will show the various possible distributions. So the things that the the Weibull gives us are things like the scale parameter, the location parameter, and the shape parameter. The location parameter, as far as we are concerned, is the point at which you begin to see distresses, and it's called the threshold time to failure. Now, the shape parameter is a very vital part of what we do because it tells us what kind of failure mode do you have? Do you have the infantile failure mode? Do you have the uniform mode of failure, which is the random mode of failure? In reliability analysis, the random mode is the random mode of failure is the uniform rate of failure. Or do you have the end of life? When we design, we hope that most of our systems will have an end of life type failure. So the Weibull analysis solves the problem and gives us these indices. And that's where it's very powerful. I've already defined, but I just wanted to mention that one simple thing about the Weibull distribution, it uses the cumulative rather than, it uses the cumulative distribution function. It doesn't use the probability density function. In which case, the 63.2, the 63rd.2 percentile value is indicative of characteristic life, and the arithmetic is right there. I don't need to go into that. And the shape factor, like I said, is also what to tell you whether you have burn-in, which is early failure. Some electronic systems are known to fail early, and then the rate of failure now decreases with time because the systems fail early. Then the characteristic, then you have the burn-in, the other end of it, you have the wear-out failure, which is the end of life failure. Now, why am I going into this? Why should we do concrete rehabilitation? Now, if you look at that little sketch we have there, there is a kink, and we usually call that the spike for the purpose of analysis. We say that's a spike in our RQI. Let's imagine that RQI is our value because RQI is high at the beginning, IROI is low at the beginning, and it projects upwards. So something that's decreasing, we are actually using, MnDOT uses the right quality index in our network. So you have that increase. Now, if you look at the area under that increase, somebody asked a valid question yesterday. How do we use this life extension or these life values? How do we use them to actually quantify benefits? So I said, well, that's a very valid question. Because most of the time, don't we talk about the area under the curve? Yes, we talk about the area under the curve as the benefit. But until you monetize that benefit, until you bring that benefit to dollar value, or normalize it according to dollars, it doesn't really compare well with another fix. So the idea of concrete rehab is to do that thing, to introduce that benefit area. And when it introduces that benefit area, then we want to step back and ask ourselves, at what cost are we introducing a particular benefit? And that's where the rubber hits the road. And again, too, the various tools in which we get things done, that reminds me of a story of, I don't know if I have time to tell any stories now, but there was a story of somebody who, he had the regular chant of all in a day's work, business as usual, a day's wage for a day's work, and he went from door to door. Anything for me to do for you? So he came to this lady's house, and the lady said, well, I have something to do. Take a brush of paint, take a bucket of paint and this brush, go paint the porch, go outside and paint the porch. So this gentleman came back after some hours, said, oh lady, that was good. I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed doing the painting. So the lady says, all done? He said, yes, it's all done. So he said, by the way, lady, what you have out there is not a Porsche. It's a Mercedes, and I painted every inch of it. So you can see how, doing the wrong thing with the right approach and so on can really cause a lot of heartache. Now, look at these three zones I have looked at in a comparison of the year 2003 remaining service life in the network with the year 2013, 2002, and 2013. Now, if we look at it in the microscopic level, I divided it into three blocks. Now, the first block, you can see the difference between the 2002 remaining service life and the 2013 remaining service life. And then imagine the amount of work that will be done to raise the 2013. Then go to the central block, and that's the area where I think we can use rehab to do a lot of things, a lot of cost-beneficial, cost-effective fixes, and raise the overall performance in the network. And this is a very sensitive part. I've done a lot of mathematical analysis in this zone, and I've seen that it's a very sensitive part where you can easily spike your overall network performance. By network, I'm talking about like a district, like a county network, or even the overall state DOT network. So that area, that zone, is the sensitive zone where you have that crisscrossing, where a little investment, rightly done, not painting a Mercedes-Benz, a little investment can change the overall landscape of the remaining service life. And that's the reason why we do concrete rehab. Dr. Debaroti Ghosh is not here. While working on this pavement investment manual, we saw the need to create a software, and we did create a software that generated performance curves for about 535,000 rows of data representing the network performance, RQI, SR. SR is surface rating in any case. It's a combination of cracking, rotting, and everything. But for concrete, of course, it's faulting, and cracking. And then the right quality index, that's a quasi definition. It's really not an index as such. It's still a rating, but it's it's how the riders felt when they rode on on a scale of 0 to 5. 5 being the best. So what we did, we went into the network and wrote this program that generated performance curves so that we can see from the D records. We also have it for the M records. By the way, the D records are the design records where all the performances, all the fixes and everything are arranged according to design. For instance, you have unbonded overlay. Thanks, Gordon. That was very. We have a lot of work to do with you because some of the things we are doing are similar. Or, for instance, a thin overlay. You would see that in the network as a design. Then we also have the M records. So from the M record, you can call any section based on its M record or on its D record. And the M records are the mile records. Okay. So we now looked at the M records and decided that we will automatically generate the performance curves. So we generated, I believe it was about 15,000 performance curves based on the M records. For the D records, I believe it's slightly less or something like that. So we have 15,000 performance curves. What do we do? How do we crunch through them? The things that are important to us are the age at which the fix is done. We also we call that that's TT, time to rehab, TTR. Then the spike on account of the rehab. Okay, there's a spike for SR, there's a spike for RQI. And then what about the CAR, which is the condition at rehab? So we're interested in that. And also, we want the remaining service life. Now, our definition of remaining service life is the number of years it will take for the performance to reach 2.5 RQI. That's our definition of remaining service life. So back to the Weibull method, your normal distribution assumes a normal distribution. Your Weibull distribution does not, but it allows you to do your calculation and later tells you your data is normally distributed, it's log normally distributed, it follows an exponential function and so on. So what we do with the Weibull distribution is that we get a particular fix and its performance over time. And then we do either a ranking or a CDF, a cumulative distribution function. So we run it through this equation that looks very complex, but it's not complex. If you look at it, what you do is take log twice, and then you linearize it. And once you linearize it, the parameters are right there from the lines that come out. And then you are able to get your beta, which is your gradient of the new straight line that you have generated, And your beta is your shape function. And then your mu is the scale function, which is the expected service life. And then later there are tools for getting the location parameter. And so having established both the reason data for concrete rehab, as well as the various, of the various elements, the various nitty-gritties of the Weibull method, I'm going to run through the remaining slides. So I did look at the interstates. The interstates are subject to very heavy traffic at tremendously high speeds. And what I found out, for major rehab without grinding, I found a characteristic life of 14 years. What I also observed was that there was no window for preventive maintenance, which is the location parameter. In other words, the T0 was 0. So there was no window for preventive maintenance. As we go along, we will see others. Now, for major CPRO with grind in the overall network, what I found was that the characteristic life was 18 years. And the failure mode was 2.9. That's the beta factor. Now, this is the interpretation of beta. If it's less than 1, it means that you have an infantile failure. If it's about 1, then you have a random failure, which is the uniform rate of failure. The farther it is away from 1, then the more end of life it belongs to. Now, like if it's between 1 and 2, then that looks like a log normal distribution, and that's usually governed by things like cracking that are not necessarily failure related, but they introduce some other form of distress modes. And the location parameter there was about 2 years. But think about it. If you have 2 years as your preventive maintenance window, how much mobilization can you really do within 2 years? So it leaves you technically with not much of a window. So here, I don't need to go through all this. These actually show us the way the various shape functions that show the kind of distribution that you have. And they are very important when we go into the real technicalities of evaluating the performance of our systems. Okay. Another thing I looked at was the interstate. I did talk about the interstate already. All right, so let's go for that. Here is the hazard function. The real definition of hazard function is the probability density function divided by the reliability, which is 1 minus fx. Okay, so this is the hazard function. Sorry, in this case, it's divided by the hazard. Sorry, which is 1 minus our fx is the cumulative distribution function. So this is from our definition of the hazard function. We can see that as the years increase, we're having something that looks like an exponential form of hazard function. The normal hazard function would be something that's more like a uniform rate. It's not affected by time as such, uniform rate of failure. And then if it was a mirror image of this, then it will definitely be an infantile type failure. And one mode of description of reliability analysis is the bathtub phenomenon. The reason why if you see the left-hand side, that's infantile type failure, and then the center is like the center of the bathtub, and the right-hand side is the other end of the bathtub. So we use the bathtub mode. So what part of the bathtub is it? And that's another way of characterizing. If you go, if we go to this slide, look at this. Here we have a characteristic life of 15.7. We went to the US highways now. We have a characteristic life of 15.7. Then there's a mathematical method that we built up, and I did use that method, and I got 3 years for the location parameter. Well, 3 years beginning to give a window for preventive maintenance. And then the beta is 1.32. That's a log normal distribution. That's close to 1. So it's a quasi-characteristic uniform failure mode, Kuhn end-of-life failure mode. Another thing I looked at was because I looked at other fixes like I hope it's not an anathema if I mention things like unbonded overlay. Actually, we are doing the same thing for every fix in the network, including all the bituminous fixes, all their chip seals and everything. In most of them, actually, there is no real rhyme and reason to the time to rehab and the remaining service life. But somehow, with the concrete rehabs, I'm seeing some rhyme and reason, either because decisions are solely based, whatever that means, solely based on the performance alone and not by political factors, or maybe we are doing something right somewhere, But something like this is pretty interesting. It shows that the spike in the ROQI is a function of the ROQI at the time of fixing. That's very rare to find in infrastructure systems. But we will dig more into it, run the same thing for other things like unbonded overlay. However, the function of remaining service life versus time to rehab, not a very wonderful function, but there's a slight decrease, which shows you that at the point you are doing certain types of fixes, the concrete might not really be ready or available or strong enough. That it might be at a point where if you do a diamond grinding, you might be introducing some more micro cracks into the system. And you need that diamond grinding to really finish up your concrete rehab. So, this is a mathematical method which I won't say I developed it from scratch, but I kind of worked on it and made it available. And I'm able to use that to test other methods of normalizing to find the location parameter. So I did run this, and I found this US highways M record performance very interesting. Because when I ran, I found that what normally should be the T0, which in most cases ends the analysis, it wasn't the best of the straight line. It's the best straight line that gives you the T0, the location parameter. So we saw that it was between 4 and 2, and finally we found it at about 2.5 years. I used that other method, and I found it to be 3 years. So essentially, we are approaching this thing from a reliability perspective. And one thing I would like to say at this point in time is that band-aids are not cost-effective. We should do rehab because regrades are extremely expensive. We don't want to get into that kind of situation that you have in that picture. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge Glenn Armstrong, Jeff Bronner, Kurt Turgeon, Dave Janish, Debaroti Gosh, Brandon, MnDOT materials engineers who have been helping with information and data that have enabled us to do this reliability analysis so far. Like I said, this is a microcosm of the Pavement Investment Manual, which we are trying to make available within a short time. With that, I thank you. Did I succeed in bringing us back to?
We're on top.
Good.
Mr. Bernard?
They're tired.
Ready for the...
There you go.
It's amazing, like the way you put it. Sometimes, like when you use the database,
Yes.
you need to like separate a kind of set of data to like kind of validate, or you use like, is there any kind of validation that you run on it?
Well, what we typically do is it's like a Bayesian approach. What we do is when we do a kind of, it's like a perturbation approach. We do that kind of analysis on the network. We go to mean road. We go to mean road where you have where you have a structured experiment and see what we have.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah, we do that. Yes.
Like we are saying that okay, maybe This is the kind of available option, and if you do it now, you have 15 years left. And then you say you went back to kind of existing examples, and then you have observed, yes.
Yeah.
That's kind of the math.
That's the way it works. Yeah. Any other?
Okay. Thanks, Bernard.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bernard. And thank you to all of this afternoon's presenters. I think there's a reception outside starting here soon.
Thanks for moderating.
Oh, no problem. Other than the one presentation being wrong.
Well, it's going to become obvious.
Yeah, I was saying.
By the second slide.
These things happen. Quick question for you. Somebody mentioned earlier about you guys using a bunch of different valve bars. I think, you guys allow the low valve, the hollow two-third valve that's galvanized and epoxy coated? Okay.
I mean, there's all kinds of variations. So just be careful.
Yeah. Well, we had a vendor, the ODOL vendor, come to us and sometimes they just say just want to make sure that
Just check with Maria. I'm going to the proof bars are online. Somewhere on their website. Just call Maria. They have
Yeah, that sounds good.
Oh, we can probably go. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I don't know if performance-wise it's going to be superior, but
Yeah. It's these days.
And we're still at the point where
yeah, you just had a report from March 9th.
they're not happy about it, but it's standard that
I don't know if
they have to prove their
So the contractor inserter friendly or basket still? Basket.
They can't get right. Our mix must be.
Tell you load the bars and then.
Yeah, they're rock.
Hard to get it in.
Yeah, exactly. So if they, once they put them in, they get a rock and that destroys their rock inside. So
Yeah, okay, yeah.
they're allowed, but nobody believes properly. Which causes a problem in overlays where they don't into the bars. So
Even if you guys are talking about old down, that guy called me too.
The thing they just make the round.
Yeah, they just go to.
He's from Illinois, right?
Yeah, yes, but we're not, we haven't allowed it.
All right.
Originally, there was a hollow valve bars that did not perform very well. I don't know how long this cost. We just had an experiment.
Usually in some other states approve it. I'm not sure which one.
They're approved.
Are you guys approved it? In Minnesota?
Older ones. I'm not sure. Our approved hours, where they're at, you know?
On MnDOT website or at the concrete office.
Yeah, we have a posted.
Let's see.
Yeah,
8 or 10, just hollow ones for
Fiber deposit, that type or?
yeah. A whole different mix. But they're all tested. You know, we pretty much require them to test them on load from, you know, that's really, truly been washed. That's depending on wherever they come from. And so it's all right. They're tested, you know, millions of cycles. To make sure that they're solid.
But actually, I think he mentioned that Washington State.
It's possible.
But he didn't remember him mentioning.
I know we have two, but I don't know.
These are just in my office or our office.
So I know there's some older two designs that allow. We actually put them in a project on that. They said, hey, you didn't test this, we had to go back and post-test them. They're already in the road, but they proved to be fine.
It's a double wall pipe.
There's a new old one, there's a new one.
This one, I think he said is a sheet of metal.
Oh, that you gotta be
That's a
careful
little
of.
scarier.
That's,
But again, if you tested
you
it,
got too much surface area. You took sheet and rolled it, and it's not a heel, so it's not essentially one piece. Unless some pipes are a little thicker, it's a flat piece, but they do roll it and they do weld it. But they weld
I'm
it.
sure that's what it is.
Like, I can't tell you how happy that made me. Like, oh my God.
That's the issue.
You just want to make sure it's tested somewhere in a laboratory.
I mean, it's kind of like, yeah.
But Maria has a procedure for that? For new wells coming in?
I would assume, yeah.
Okay,
She's the first to contact.
Yeah.
Very, very good resources here.
Is that proprietary?
Yes. Right.
For federal funding, guys.
Yep.
So we would do like that, if they get internal feature out, probably, we use it on like that's patching project or a small job or something,
Yeah.
Yeah, but first let's get through the laboratory testing.
Yeah, yeah,
Because that'll tell you much quicker.
right.
Then you'll be happy to roll it.
In doing a small project for construction building.
Yeah. Yeah.
Worst is.
And the MC Squared, of course, had that big effort to try to come up with standards for that. It was kind
Okay,
of all
yeah,
flat.
that sounds good, because I think this
Was
is,
that waiting for people to come and keep on it, more completed, so it hasn't got anywhere, so because I did all the legwork.
Okay.
Both corrosion and structural capacity, and there's just not enough states interested enough to put money in to get it done.
Or,
Yeah.
or don't have
All
one.
right, the last, the one that had up here, right?
Are you?
Yeah, I mean, this effort was 4 or 5 years ago, where I had it all laid out, here's gonna be the new national standard. We just need some laboratory testing, but it's not.
So I'll be honest.
Enough,
Yeah.
enough interest.
Just that's enough other stuff
Exactly,
people
yeah.
interested in and never took off.
Right.
Oh, thanks for the information.
What was that testing for? You said.
There was a proposal for change, was it 254? The epoxy coated dowel was the only one that's an national standard.
yeah.
So there was a proposal to accommodate all these new cars. And that was consistent with it, both structural capacity and corrosion.
So really, it was a procedure developed for any type.
Well, it's gonna be an update of this 40-year-old ESPN standard. All that is epoxy coated dowel, steel dowel.
Thanks, Charles.
You're welcome. So, with all these new innovations.
I'm very lucky that.
There's a need, but again, there's apparently not enough. Most states just put the same dollar for the last 100 years. They don't care, especially in southern states. But we, all our trustees, we need to come up with a non-negotiable dollar alternatives.
Yeah. Is that, we have two kinds
I
of
think that-
gross in the code.
Sometimes partnerships, we have data, yeah, because.
Well, we ought to have some.
Yeah, data is what's great for me, because I think I
Green's an
our
ammo.
lab, we can use our lab.
Yeah,
Is our
The
normal.
purple, I think they're what, pre-coated
But we
with
don't have
formulas?
everything, we can't
So
run
I
everything.
have no idea.
What about in the spring?
I don't have the field,
I think we did.
Yeah.
so I can do some
The
stuff.
ones pre-coated, the green ones
A
are
lot
not
of data
straight.
for us is
Form of
it's like,
the best
so that
one is
clock
straight.
is not long enough for me to collect
Right.
the data. So
Purple
anytime
ones are
partnership where I can
pre-coated, that says it's slippery.
Oh, okay,
What's it
okay.
called, tactile or something?
It's such, it's almost a silicone that they have on it. So it's slipped.
Is that the one that you?
I don't get hold of use, maybe.
Meanwhile, again, we have these options.
Majority of them are like green enamels,
Involved.
or green epoxies are most common.
Yeah, and I.
Although on our high performance projects that are designed for.
All right, thanks, Rita. Take care. Have a good weekend.
It can't be a standard epoxy.
Which normally goes to stainless steel. How?
Is that environment pretty corrosive here? Because you guys are using salt.
Especially in the metro area, it's a high salt usage, so the high volume of cars.
And just so it's right at the joint, just next down. The rest is, anything buried in the concrete is,
Good.
yeah, it could be uncoated, but right in the joint, just next down. About 17 years. So this is a standard epoxy.
So you guys